Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar presentation, Hope for Homelessness. I have with me today Supervisor Oscar Villegas from Yolo County and Councilmember Jan Arbuckle from the City of Grass Valley. My name is Martin Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Local Government. Certainly you are all familiar with the statistics, but I think it's important to note that from 2007 to 2014, California saw a steady decline in the number of people experiencing homelessness. But since then, we've seen a steady increase in the number of homeless throughout California. And with the 2017 point in time count, we currently have 135,000 people in California that are homeless. And we know that this number is probably higher by a multiple of 3 or 4 times, and that is a particular challenge. In the past, we thought that homelessness was an issue just being experienced in our major cities. But we know now, and certainly the facts show it, that the homelessness is an issue that's being experienced throughout California, in our rural communities, in our suburban neighborhoods, and certainly our major cities as well. The demographics of homelessness are changing as well. Many homeless individuals struggle from substance abuse disorders and mental health issues as well. But we also see people pushed into homelessness because of domestic violence, the lack of affordable housing or employment opportunities, and the cost of health care. And in addition, we see thousands of Californians experiencing homelessness or are displaced every year by natural disasters such as floods and wildfires. As national and state programs fall short of fully addressing this issue, local governments are coming together to find solutions for their communities. Collaboration, cooperation, and support at the local level are key to addressing our homeless crisis. That's why the League of California Cities and the California State Association of Counties formed the Joint Homeless Task Force in late 2016. The task force report was developed in partnership with the Institute for Local Government and provides practical tools for cities and counties in California to use in helping them address homelessness in their communities. The report can be found at www.ca-ilg.org, and there'll be a link to that site as well. Let me turn it over to Oscar and Jan with the first question. You know, homelessness has captured the attention and energy of a great number of state and local leaders. Jan and Oscar, why is this issue so important to you and your respective communities?
You know, I think for me, it goes way beyond being an elected official. I mean, this really sort of transcends now every walk of our life. We really are seeing folks every day, and the idea of, you know, how do I help, you know, and that sort of empathy that you feel when you see somebody that clearly is not going to have a warm bed or a roof over their head at night. It tells at you in a very different way. And so I think when you see this day after day, you really are sort of compelled to do something about it. And certainly for myself, being in an elected office, it gives me a little more credibility to sort of address it in a more direct way than say maybe somebody who just drives by and sees it on their way home from work. And so for me, that's kind of been the driver. Is it really just it's tugging at me beyond simply my role as an elected official.
And for me, I mean, I'm from a very small rural community, and a lot of people feel that we shouldn't have a homeless problem. But we have just as much of a homeless issue as anybody in a larger urban area. But ours is a little bit differently. And so we have to not only look at what can we do to help these people get off the streets? How do we help them get shelter? We also have to look at the fact that they are camping out in our forests and in our open spaces, which presents a huge fire issue for the entire area. So one of the reasons that is so important is it's a safety issue for the community, as well as trying to help these people find a way to get off the streets, right. and find a path for them. And so,
great. Well, those that have seen the report and have read it have commented to a few of us in terms of it doesn't prescribe legislation or a one-size-fits-all solution. So what's the purpose of the report? And how can counties and cities use this report to help them understand and address their homeless challenge?
Well, I think the main thing, and I think that's one of the, excuse me, the thing that we have learned through this process is the city and the counties have to work together. This is not a city issue, it's not a county issue, and it's not a state issue. We have to find a way to come together and collaborate so that we can come to a solution. It's not meant for legislation because it is not a one-size-fits-all. What will work in small rural communities will not work in large urban areas such as Los Angeles or Sacramento. So that's what the report does. It kind of gives you a template on how we can extract the best information and make it work for your community.
Perfect. Thank you. Oscar.
And I'd add to that, what it did is it really created an opportunity to have different jurisdictions up and down the state really kind of explain a little bit about what they're doing, what their challenges are, and what their strengths and their weaknesses are as it relates to trying to address the issue of homelessness. And when you read the report, you'll see examples of small communities and what they've been able to do and how they've been able to be successful, large communities, what they've been able to do, some of their successes. And I think it sort of lays out examples of what's working in different communities. So when you read it, you can maybe read it for looking for opportunities to maybe find a like-sized community and maybe even call them to say, how did you guys do what you did, right? Because it's getting started, it's very difficult, but when you've got an example that maybe already worked, it might make it a little bit easier to pick up the phone, call that community to ask them what it is, what were their challenges, how did you get started, and it might serve as a template, as Jan said, in that respect.
Well, certainly in terms of CSAC and the league came together around homelessness and issued this report, and it reflects their best thinking, collective best thinking. I guess, hearing from you, how important are partnerships and collaborations at the local level to understand this issue and address this issue and the symptoms and causes of homelessness?
I think it's vital. It's vital. Again, like I said earlier, cities can't do it on their own without the county's help. Counties can't do it on their own without the city's help. And together, we can't do it without the state's help. So it really, really showed us the necessity for trying to find some common ground where we don't stay in our own little silos like we are so apt to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think what the opportunity provided me to do is to hear all the good examples that exist throughout the state, right? So, for example, we know what we know, but what we don't know is what other communities are doing to impact and to address the issues of homelessness. For example, if you read the report, you'll see that the faith community is an essential component. Nonprofits are an essential component. As Jan said, cities and counties working together is it's kind of a no-brainer. But we also need to be partnering with the state and federal partners to make sure that we're all sort of trying to figure out how to track along the same lines. And so I think, one of the things that I learned in just over the course of the last 12 months really has opened my eyes to how many other entities are out there that maybe you don't think of that could be really good, really helpful partners. But to be honest, that doesn't happen on the natural. That really does require that sort of check your bags at the door before you come in to be a party to finding creative new solutions to the issue of homelessness. And so, it's hard to check your bags at the door, right? We all know what we are really good at, and we bring that sort of bag into the room, but if there's some way to sort of check those bags at the door, I think the likelihood of finding new partners, non-traditional partners, is much more.
Very good. Well, Oscar, at the first task force meeting, you shared a perspective that I think was somewhat unique in terms of when you were a city council member and you looked at the issue of homelessness, you had one perspective. And then when you became a supervisor, you had another perspective. Do you mind sharing with the folks your story? And I think it's quite telling.
Yeah, and I'm sure Jan will laugh with me on this, but having spent 14 years on the city council, I was pretty clear that the problem of homelessness was a county problem. It was pretty clear to me, based upon my responsibilities as a city council member, that the county wasn't doing enough. And I then got elected to the County Board of Supervisors, and it wasn't quite as clear as I had originally thought. It was clear to me, what was clear to me was that it was going to require a true partnership. In the way that as I mentioned, checking your bags at the door and trying to find those common grounds. That was an eye-opening experience for me, because I was certain that I knew where the problem, where the responsibility lay, but that wasn't quite the case. Yeah.
Very good. Well, and we've certainly seen that when we've had the opportunity to present in a city-only crowd, whether it's city managers or council members and mayors. Certainly that perception exists in terms of it's a county issue. But when we've had the opportunity to present in a county with a county-only audience, we've had that same reaction in terms of it's a city issue. And so in terms of the partnership and collaboration specifically, and what advice would you give to your counterparts at the city and county level to initiate those conversations that spark collaboration and partnership? Or how would you get started if you already aren't doing this in partnership?
Well, I think one of the very first questions I asked Oscar when I met him and came to my very first meeting was, how do we get along with how do we form better relationships with the county? How can we make them understand that our issues are as important as theirs, and we just have a different way we have to go about it? And he just kind of looked at me and he goes, I wish I knew the answer to that question. He really did. And it's like, but the thing is that we've learned we have to be able to check your baggage at the door. We really do. I agree with that 100%. And it's the key. It's the key. You can't have nonprofits saying, this is the only way we're going to do it, and I'm going to keep all my resources in one little silo here. And the cities can't do that as well, and neither can the counties, and neither can the state, because it is so different. And so how do we do that? I don't know. How do you get people to check their egos? Because it comes down to, egos and wanting to do the right thing, just so much wanting to do the right thing. But you have to let go of little pieces in order to have a whole pie.
Great. So that personal willingness to be part of the solution.
Yes.
In regards to that conversation, where you have leadership at the county level, Board of Supervisors, or at the city level, and being able to convene the stakeholders and begin that conversation, can you talk about how important data is to that conversation, or how important this report can be to spark that conversation?
Data is essential, right? I think we all want to know whether or not we're having an impact, and data is going to be important. I think it's easy to get caught up in trying to create that perfect data set, and in pursuit of that perfect data set, you're going to miss an opportunity to actually have an impact. And so while I'm a data guy as well, and I want to know whether or not we're making progress and to what extent that as our programs had an impact, it is important. And I believe that the report includes some good examples of data collection systems that have been used to really sort of illustrate whether or not the work that's happening has had an impact, and whether there are, some folks refer to them as cost savings, but there's also cost avoidance, right? And so while it might not show up as something that you can score as money that you can then maybe redirect to some other location, there are cost avoidances that you can incur, and there are good examples in the report in terms of what Santa Clara and Silicon Valley they had done in order to lay out whether or not what they're doing has an impact, and to what extent are there cost avoidances in the mental health system and the criminal justice system, all those systems that are impacted if we're not doing something. And so that the report does present a good example of how to collect that data.
Good. And it goes to the cost of homelessness. Yes.
Absolutely. And the thing is that unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, data is what we have to go on whenever we make financial decisions or decisions on where our resources are going to go. Everybody, including the public, wants to hold us accountable to how do you justify that? So data is absolutely important, and I agree so much with Oscar. It's been a great pleasure actually working with him. The report speaks to that. There are so many good examples in that report of how you can glean a little bit from this one and that one and that one and make it your own and make it fit to your community.
Can I just jump off of that a little bit? Because I think Jan and I have talked about this. So to your point about collecting data and how important is it, part of the tricky part for elected officials, if you will, in addressing the issue of homelessness, we're reminded of the likelihood that that this is a very, very complicated issue to address. And we tend to be, when we don't know what the right solution is, we tend to be a little bit risk averse, right? I mean, everybody's always looking for that perfect solution. And the fact that you're collecting a lot of data might actually show, heaven forbid, that what you're doing doesn't work. And the notion that you're collecting data and the fact that we're risk averse and that data might somehow surface to show what you're doing doesn't work, doesn't lend itself to taking the kinds of risks that we need to be taking. And that's a hard thing to do, especially when you're asking other people to take that risk with you. Right. And so that lends itself perfectly, and I know Jan and I have talked about this, it makes it really difficult to start something when you don't know whether or not it's going to be successful. So we have kind of that double whammy kind of working against us.
Yes, incredibly complex. But we've got 500 folks on this webinar, and hundreds more will likely look at it once it's archived at CSAC's website. What advice can you give staff to make that presentation to their Board of Supervisors or their council, in the sense of being able to display the data, have the different components and the examples, but essentially making the case to their elected officials? What makes a compelling case? And you've been part of these conversations. You've seen these reports. You've seen the plans. What makes a compelling case as staff is preparing their reports? It's probably an unfair question, but I think
it makes sense.
You know what makes a good report. What would you encourage staff to make sure is included in their staff reports to boards and councils?
I think that taking the pieces that fit for your community, so for us, the rural communities, or the rural communities in California, taking that piece that is working into the smaller communities, and how does that fit to our community? Also, just making the other electeds aware of, everyone's aware that homelessness is a big issue, and it's a major issue, and it's probably the #1 issue on everybody's strategic plans and goal setting and that type of thing is what do we do and how do we address it? I think that by having this report where it has it's so well done. I have to compliment staff. It was so well done that it's so easy to read, that if they supply each of their electeds a copy of this report, which is very easy to do, and perhaps in a special session or as part of a presentation of a council meeting or a Board of Supervisors meeting, have the presentation of the webinar. Obviously you couldn't do the whole hour, but at least extract the pieces that would be relevant. And that would give not only the electeds and the rest of the staff, but the community at large, the opportunity to see that there are solutions out there. We just have to work together to get there.
Good, thank you. With regards to the solutions, there are 19 different examples of emerging practices or best practices in this report. And Jan, you made this point a couple of times in terms of using those examples to speak to their current situation. If the best practice isn't their practice, it's good to learn from that. But I'd love to hear that perspective in terms of how important it is to be able to draw from what other California communities are doing, as well as California communities that look like yours. And how does that speak to what's possible in your community?
Well, I think it's extremely important because, why reinvent the wheel? I'm a firm believer in if somebody's doing something right, or even if it's just a portion of it that is right and it fits, extract that one, and then go to another community. Oh, that one would work in our community, and that's what this report does. It supplies that information and from all the different groups and what's working and what hasn't worked.
That's right, yeah.
As well.
And Oscar, one of your county's initiatives is in the report. Can you talk about that experience in terms of what you were attempting to accomplish and how you went about getting it done?
Yeah, I think it was, looking back at it, it had tremendous amount of risk, and the opportunity to fail was right in front of our face every step of the way. In fact, many people said, "You're wasting your time, don't do this, this is good money after bad." But I think what really made the difference was, and it kind of goes to your question earlier, about our staff had really thought through the prospects of what the upside would be rather than focusing on the down. And I think that sort of, that freed staff up to sort of dream a little bit about what could happen. But that also required us to take some risk, right? Because it wasn't, and I think we're constantly looking for quick fix solutions, and we're looking for broad brush stroke policy that doesn't really work when you're dealing with each and every person that has a unique set of circumstances. And we were talking about relocating 50 to 60 people all at one time.
Right.
So we were looking for a quick fix, and we were looking for something that we could do to just say, and this is what it is. But what our staff did was start working on each and every case almost a year before the move. And that required a tremendous amount of time, a lot of energy. They really had to kind of stick to it. And I really do believe, despite the fact that we ran the risk of failure repeatedly throughout the course of kind of that 1.5-year process, the upside was tremendous, because our staff knew that if they kind of front-loaded their work and understood exactly what each person needed, the likelihood of success would have been so much more. And I really do attribute it to a willingness to kind of play the long game, if you will. And that's hard to do these days, right? We're always expecting solutions to be readily available, and we want to see the results by the end of the week. And this is not one of those things.
Well, and that's certainly what comes out in the report in terms of the number of communities willing to take that risk, do something innovative, do something that uniquely matches their assets to the challenge in their communities, and craft something that works. And I think certainly you see that in the terms of the partnerships that are created within agencies as well as across different jurisdictions, and as well as in terms of the faith-based and other private sector partners as well. And certainly it's going to take everyone in the community to make not just progress, but sustain progress. I think in the few minutes remaining, what would be that one nugget or that one piece of advice, Jan? And I'll point to you in terms of, we before the webinar, we talked about the importance of public outreach and engagement. And we haven't yet made that point home, but perhaps you could help end our presentation by talking about the importance of public outreach and engagement.
Well, it's essential. You can't, because we can't do it alone. I mean, no matter what size your board is, whether it's a 7-board or 7-member, 5-board, 9, 12, whatever it is, it takes more than that small amount of people to do this. And so by outreaching to the communities, to the faith-based, to the nonprofits, to the jurisdictions that are around you even, to find some kind of common ground where we can find some solutions. I mean, if we could say, here's the report and we solved homelessness, we would all get the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, we would be there, but that's not happening. Because one of the things that I have learned over the years is the fact that every homeless person has a story. They are not the same. There are people there by choice, by circumstances. There are people there because they have animals, and most shelters won't allow animals to come in. So there is no one size fits all. And so it is so important to engage all the community so that they understand that one size does not fit all. So you need to have that engagement with the company, with all interested parties, and the community at large, because they are the ones that are seeing it, are affected by it as well. So,
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think one of the things that I've learned in recent years is that willingness to take a little bit of risk, right? I mean, there is no playbook. And every community has its own challenges. It has its own strengths. And really, once you take inventory of kind of what your strengths are, where your challenges might lie, what resources may be available, what partners you might be able to pull into the table, a willingness to kind of take a little bit of risk. It's not forever. I mean, you can pilot some stuff. It doesn't have to be forever. We oftentimes take this sort of, we assume that what we're doing is going to be forever, and that's not the case. And try new things and be willing to fail. I think that is what's going to push the envelope, because if we're only going to be doing or willing to do the things we've already done, that's as far as we're going to go, right? So I think there has to be a willingness to take calculated risk. I'm not talking about being reckless. I mean, we don't want to be reckless. These are public funds. But I do think that's one thing. Number two, I would say engage your community, because people really are empathetic to folks who don't have a warm place to go at night. They want to help. So find ways to engage your community. I think is an important component that I think we oftentimes miss. We think government has to solve it all, and there are residents who really do want to step up and be helpful. And so find ways to engage your community. And then the third thing I would say is make sure that your community knows what you're doing, because we don't do a very good job of advertising what we are doing when we are doing things, and there's a tendency to, not know, and all of a sudden there's this assumption that we're not doing anything when we are. And so I think making sure that you advertise it is important.
Very good. That's great advice. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Oscar. Now let's open it up to questions. So isn't the only thing that will help more affordable housing and better paying jobs? So in terms of the question goes to looking at the crux of the challenge, is the solution affordable housing and better paying jobs?
Oh, that is a really good question. It goes back to the chicken and the egg. It really does. So if you get somebody in housing, will they be able to get a job? And if they get a person a job, will they be able to get housing? I think you can't have one without the other. You can't have housing if you don't have a way to pay for it. So I would love to know the answer to that question, to be quite honest with you.
And I think that's what makes this issue so complicated, given in terms of the number of homeless folks that are suffering from substance abuse issues as well as mental health issues as well. But certainly that's probably a big component of the challenge.
Yeah, I think it's a big component, but I don't think it ends there, right? I think even if you've got a really, really good job and you've got a very affordable place to live, if you have mental health issues or if you have substance abuse issues, you're not going to get there. You're going to end up in a bad place. And so I think that is exactly why we have to work together, because the housing we can build all the housing we want, and we can make sure we can have all the jobs that we want. But if we aren't working together to make sure that folks are in a good space to take advantage of that have those wraparound supportive services, you're going to end up with the same problem that we're talking about today. So I think it all does work together.
Thank you. Another question here is in terms of the observation that sometimes progress seems to be very slow. What's your suggestion for moving things along more quickly at that policy level? And I think in terms of, as you were talking about, the willingness to take risk and the importance of the outreach and engagement piece and that PR piece, does that accelerate that policy change when you have all of those things in place and moving in a positive direction? Are you able to move faster?
I think so. But the key is, how do we get those all in place? And I think that's the question. And how do we bring everybody together? Because once we're together as a cohesive group, we can do great things. And I think that's seen no matter what, and not just addressing the homeless issue, but in life itself. If you have everybody moving in the same positive direction, you get so much more accomplished, so much more quickly. So that's the key, is we need to bring these people and get them all together.
And as we were sharing earlier as well, in terms of the willingness to check our agendas and egos at the door and build that trust within that collaborative group.
Absolutely.
Very good. In regards to the next question here is in terms of what strategies can help to deal with NIMBYism?
I don't know, you just try to educate the public. Educate the public. I think education and communication is the key to solving most of our problems. And NIMBYism is one of them. You need to assure people that by bringing a shelter to their community or a halfway house or whatever it happens to be is not going to severely impact their quality of life and the reason that they moved there to begin with. And it comes from communication and education.
Again, underscoring that importance of that public and outreach and engagement. And actually, in terms of that, I think also where we see success happening is versus solutions imposed on potential NIMBYs, the community. The community is part of the solution in terms of help building and crafting that solution. So the next question is in terms of what do you suggest to prevent or the prevention of homelessness in the first place? Is it possible to identify at-risk individuals before they actually become homeless?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of really good data out there that already sort of illustrates exactly what the profile of someone who is, and frankly, it kind of points to all of us, really, where a lot of us are one paycheck away from sleeping in our car or not having that housing that we maybe rely on right now. And so I think, again, it's a full spectrum of things that we need to look at, and there's good data out there, that, as I said, that shows already the propensity for folks who are most likely to end up homeless because they're already kind of living on the edge, they're overextended, and there are programs and services available to sort of prop people up who are teetering on the edge of ending up in that situation. So so prevention is absolutely a component of this.
Now, would you recommend, in terms of as county staff and city staff create their homeless plan, to be able to not only look at the issues of specifically speaking to the homeless in their communities, but those that are at risk as well, those that are extremely low income or very low income individuals in their communities?
Absolutely. I think that if your community has, and if they don't, they should have, a program to identify and help them and let them, again, I go back to education and communication. Let them know what programs are available, what resources are available to them. I would probably be willing to say most of the people don't know that there is help for them. They don't know that there are programs that if you can't make your rent payment or your mortgage payment, there are programs out there. And I think it falls upon us, cities and county government, to find out what resources there are and make them and communicate them. Again, back to I keep saying, education and communication is the key.
So sometimes it's not the creation of a new program, but perhaps guiding people or navigating people to the resources that are already available. Right?
Exactly.
And I'll just add on to that. I think, having served on the county board of supervisors the last 4 years, I'm constantly reminded of the range of services that are available to folks who could benefit from them, but we don't market those services. We're not very good at kind of marketing what we have, but I'm blown away when staff present to the board the programs and services that are available. And I think to myself, I know folks who could benefit from this, but it's bringing those folks into a county system is difficult. And so I think we could probably do a better job of being in the community, looking for the very folks who can benefit from our services to help prevent them from ending up in the spot where now it's a whole different ballgame. And so, the traditional county system isn't real good at being in the community, right? Looking for folks who can benefit. And I think that's one thing that we definitely need to look inward a little bit to see if we can do a better job of being in the community.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, for the communities that have a 211 system in place, probably that's a good resource to be able to connect to, not only individuals but organizations as well. And for those that don't, perhaps a model to look at as well.
Right.
Here's a really tough question. As you collaborate across jurisdictions, how do you address privacy issues and HIPAA in particular? And if we had the answer, we'd
Great.
get the goal.
I don't know the answer to that question, but
Yeah, I would imagine, I don't know the exact answer, but I would imagine there has to be memorandums of understanding in terms of how you share that information. I don't know the details of how that works, but I would imagine there has to be some agreement. I know the state and federal government has examples of what those forms might look like so that you're not reinventing the wheel, but I know that there are these agreements that have to be in place in order to share that information.
The HIPAA issue, the privacy issue, has confounded many and has stopped many from collaborating or sharing key data, and especially as it relates to understanding the true cost of homelessness or the potential savings of homeless prevention initiatives. But I think the advice I would give is connect with your council, your agency council, quickly, early, and be able to flesh out this issue. There are communities that have found ways to address this, and also perhaps it presents some opportunities for other solutions to emerge as well. But I wouldn't be too deterred. Take that risk, but bring in your legal counsel to be able to make sure the course that you take is in fact one that will keep you on the straight and narrow.
That's right.
Next question in terms of how do you address the hard to reach rural population? Jan, this one's right up your alley.
Actually, it's not that difficult, especially with the internet and social media and those types of communications available. I know in Nevada County, there's several Facebook pages, Nevada County Happening Now, and on and on and on, where this is how you can get that information to the people because they are looking at social media. And I was very reluctant to be one of the people that joined social media way back when, but I am finding more and more that this is how people communicate, especially people who live in rural areas that don't necessarily, that live off in my area especially, there's a lot of people who live off the grid.
Oh, interesting.
But they have internet. They have internet access. They may not have, lights or any of that, but they do have internet access, and that's how they get their information. So I think in this day and age, it's easier to reach the rural population through that.
Thank you. Now we have a question specifically with regards to affordable housing and vouchers. So many counties and cities focus on vouchers, yet many landlords won't accept the voucher. How do you attract landlords to accept vouchers if the recipients aren't also receiving case management services? So that wraparound service that you were talking about.
Yeah, there's an example of a successful community that's doing exactly that in the report. But that takes a lot of work, right? You don't just end up, having a 5-minute conversation with the landlord to say, hey, we're gonna make sure that the folks that are worthy of a voucher and we'd like you to house them in your housing units are going to be good for you. That's going to require some time, some trust. Again, maybe try something for a little while, see whether or not that works, and some assurances that the wraparound services to help folks kind of stay in a good place are going to be there. And that's a harder thing to do, right? The county and its delivery of that system has to be willing to say, okay, we're going to have to establish some trust with this landlord to make sure that we're there every step of the way to make sure that the folks that they're receiving into their units are going to be in a good spot, and that's going to take some trust and some risk, and so, but it can be done, and there's a good example in the report.
Good. And I think it speaks to the sense that you can wish that relationship is trusting and is strong enough to be able to do that, but experience shows you actually have to work towards it, not just wish that it happened. And to take those steps to build that relationship, take those steps that breed success, and then build from success.
And that takes, if I could just, that takes a real commitment by the leaders and the staff to say, we're going to see this through. The reason I say that is because our Bridge to Housing project in Yolo County was exactly that. We committed along with our staff to make sure that each person that was going to be moved into this hotel was going to get those wraparound services so that they ended in a better spot. And that was a very intensive 120 days that we provided that service, but it was very rewarding at the end.
Nice. Well, thank you. The homelessness report is available on the ILG website. Jan, thank you very much. Oscar, thank you very much for your time. And if you have the last word as the host of the webinar, Oscar, it's yours.
I would just say take some risks, work with your colleagues on the city council, and I think good things will come.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, attentive listeners. Appreciate it.